One day, from the rising to the setting of the sun, from the moment we wake to the moment we fall asleep, a place in time with unlimited potential to make history, where one conversation, one idea, one decision can change a perspective, a legacy. Someday will be your last day. What if you never saw the sun rise again? What would you do? What would you think? What if you lived every day as though it's your last day? You are at a crossroads. This is your moment. Today can be your one day.
He's famous for his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. That sermon sparked the first great awakening in the 1730s and 1740s. And can I just say, we need another one. And we're praying for revival. And man, wouldn't it be awesome if it started right here in the nation's capital? Jonathan Edwards did more than preach one sermon. He was also a leading academic of his day, graduated from Yale at 13 as valedictorian. After graduating, studied on average 13 hours a day. Hey, they didn't have Facebook. After graduating, wrote dozens of theological volumes and also wrote a biography that inspired a generation of missionaries titled The Life and Diary of David Brainerd. Well, Edwards also served as the third president of Princeton University, got sick and died a few months later. But few people have left more of an imprint on the 18th century America than Jonathan Edwards. By the way, was also a family man, had 11 kids, spent 1 hour every evening with his children. Now, his family tree is legendary. I think I've shared this before. Of his known descendants, there are 300 ministers and missionaries. 120 became university professors, over 100 lawyers, 60 prominent authors. There are 30 judges, 14 college presidents, 3 members of Congress, and 1 vice president. Not to mention an interesting collection of people like Edith Roosevelt, the first lady and second wife of Teddy Roosevelt, and Frank Nelson Doubleday, the publisher, In Case You Care. Now, here's the backstory. I don't know what precipitated this defining decision, but one day changed everything. January 12, 1723. It was Edwards' all-in moment. He gave himself to God with a written declaration. He said, I made a solemn dedication of myself to God and wrote it down, giving up myself and all that I had to God, to be for the future in no respect my own, to act as one that had no right to himself in any respect, and solemnly vowed to take God for my whole portion and felicity, looking on nothing else as any part of my happiness, nor acting as if it were. One footnote, Edwards came up with 70 resolutions. I actually have a copy of those resolutions in my Bible. They have inspired some of my own resolutions, but I would suggest that this one man whose life impacted millions It traces back to one day, January 12, 1723. Let me share two more stories. Spoken a few times at a gathering of some of the most generous Christians in the country, people who have devoted their lives to giving away the wealth that they've accumulated. While I was at one of these gatherings, I met some of the family members of the McClellan Family Foundation. They're some of the most respected philanthropists in the world. They have a family foundation worth more than $400 million in assets, and they've given away more than $500 million to kingdom causes since 1945. Here's the backstory. June 7, 1857, a Scotsman by the name of Thomas McClellan made a covenant with God on his 20th birthday, and he renewed this covenant on his 50th and 70th birthday. Now, more than 5 generations later, the seed he sowed is still multiplying in the millions of dollars that are given away. But the genealogy of generosity traces back to one defining prayer. Thomas McClellan went all in with God, prayed this prayer: "O God of heaven, recorded in thy book of remembrances that from henceforth I am thine forever. I renounce all former lords that have had dominion over me and consecrate all that I am and all that I have, the faculties of my mind, the members of my body, my worldly possessions, my time, my influence over others, all to be used entirely for thy glory." A few years ago, I had the privilege of sharing a meal with Stanley Tam. Stanley spoke at NCC when he was a youngster, 93. He's now 98. And in 1936, he had a business idea. There was this new thing, plastic. And he started the United States Plastic Corporation with $37 in capital. Now, a few years into that venture, it went through one of the most unique corporate takeovers ever. Stanley legally transferred 51% of the shares of his company to God. It took 3 lawyers because the first 2 thought he was crazy. Now, most of us at that point would be feeling pretty good about giving God 51%. Stanley felt bad. And so he made a decision on January 5th, 1955, to give his entire business 100% to his senior partner, as he calls God. He transferred all of the stock, became a salaried employee. At the time, annual revenues were less than $200,000. From that day to this day, Stanley Tam's given away more than $120 million to kingdom causes. January 12, 1723, June 7, 1857, January 15, 1955. One day, one decision. That's all it takes. Now, the Bible is full of one days. In fact, it's one of my favorite little statements in the Bible. Every time I get to a verse that says one day, my heart skips a beat. My pulse quickens a little bit, and I'll tell you why, because today could be the day. I believe in a God who can evade the reality of our lives at any given moment. Now, usually we have to make a decision. Often it's the hardest decision you've ever made. But if you're willing to take that one risk, make that one change, make that one decision, game on, because your life is about to change. And today could be the first day of the rest of your life. Bible is full of these one days. Now, some of them are bad, okay? Samson, that story starts out one day. He went and slept with a prostitute. Okay, bad decision, bad day, but we also have a God who can redeem any mistake we've made. Isn't that awesome? In fact, a God who can turn your worst day into your best day, can turn any day into the first day of the rest of your life. And then I couple that because then there's this story about Joseph, and it starts out one day. One day, Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. And you remember what he does? He makes a courageous decision. He runs out of the house. Now, what's crazy about this story is he then gets falsely accused and gets thrown into prison, an Egyptian dungeon, all for doing the right thing, and then he's there for 17 years. Like, it sure seems like this one isn't panning out quite the right way. But then there's another one day. It's a day that someone has a dream and he interprets it. And then there's another one day, and on that day, the Pharaoh has a dream, and guess what? He needs someone to interpret it. Well, the one day that happened a few years earlier, and then the one day that happened before that put him in a place to have that one day, then one day, he interprets a dream for Pharaoh. Pharaoh makes him his right-hand man, and what happens? He saves not one nation, but two from famine. Saves two nations. Saves two nations. Why? Because one day he made a decision to not do what he knew was wrong. Last week, talked about the day the disciples made a decision to drop their nets and follow Jesus. Man, many of you made that decision last weekend. I heard some of these stories. Unbelievable. Listen, we just celebrate because that's the first day, not just of the rest of your life, that's the first day of eternity right there. By the way, cannot wait for our all church. We're going to come together next weekend, next Sunday night, 6 p.m. at the Lincoln Theater. And we're going to see some people get baptized. And again, if you haven't been baptized, man, you need to get wet and go public with your faith. Now, I don't know what decision you need to make, but I do know this. You're one decision away from a totally different life. And I believe that today could be your one day. More than anything else, I think my prayer is that this series would get in our spirits, that your life can change on a dime. Your life can change on a decision. One day, one decision, one idea, one divine appointment. That is all it takes to turn your life around. I wish I had time because I could share a little bit of my biography and some of those one-day moments, and I'll share some of them. But here's what I've learned. You can't determine when and where and how. But if you do the right thing day in and day out, week in and week out, year in and year out, long obedience in the same direction. You keep doing what you know is the right thing to do. I want to tell you, something's going to happen. Your one day is going to come. How do I know that? Because the God who began a good work carries it to completion. Because all of our days are ordained by God because He is ordering our footsteps, and your one day, it's going to come. And I love what Sam Walton said when he was interviewed about his success as the founder of Walmart and Sam's Club. His net worth, by the way, I think $62.1 billion when he died, would make him the 8th wealthiest person in the history of history. And I love it. A reporter once said, how'd you become an overnight success? Probably a very young reporter, I'm guessing. And I love Sam Walton's answer with kind of a smile on his face. He said, it took 20 years to become an overnight success. But you keep doing the right thing day in and day out, week in and week out, and your one day is going to come. If you have a Bible, I want you to turn over Acts chapter 10, and we're going to look at one of my favorite stories. I think I've preached this passage more than maybe any passage in the Bible, but I want to do a little different this weekend. One of the storylines is prayer, and I'll touch on that, but there's a second storyline that really I've not preached on, and it's that second storyline that I want to focus on this weekend. Acts chapter 10 and verse number 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. And then this little sentence, these two things, if you're going to reverse engineer this divine appointment, and I'm gonna pull a Paul Harvey and share the rest of the story in just a minute. But it's these two statements that are underlined in my Bible. It says, he gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. Okay, that's all I need to know. That's all I need to know about this guy. Really, all I need to know is that he's someone who prayed to God regularly and he gave generously to those who are in need. And then I'm not surprised about what happens next. Can I tell you what happens next? Well, God gives him a vision. One day at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. I'm going to tell you real quickly in 2 minutes what happened. He has this vision. He sends his men to Joppa because God says there's someone named Simon there who's staying with Simon the tanner. And so he sends his men. Now, meanwhile, Peter is praying up on the rooftop. And while he's praying, he has this crazy vision of eating unclean animals. And he doesn't get it at all, except that what God is trying to show him is that the Gentiles are not unclean, that Jesus died for everybody, not just the Jewish people. And so he gets this revelation, and he ends up risking his reputation, kind of putting his credentials on the table, because at this point, the way, as it was known, was a sect of Judaism. It was a Jewish thing. But he takes this step of faith and he goes with Cornelius's men and he preaches the good news of the gospel to Cornelius and his family. And the next thing you know, Cornelius and his family are not just saved, they're baptized on the spot. And I love the little phrase in verse 25 in Acts 10. It says, as Peter entered the house. The reason why I love it is because to me, it's the turning point in church history. It's the wardrobe in the Chronicles of Narnia. It's the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland. I call it the door to whosoever. As Peter entered the house, are you ready? Whosoever will may come. In this moment, the gospel is open to everybody. In fact, let's have a little bit of fun with it this weekend at all 7 campuses. How many of you aren't Jewish? Let me see your hands. Can I ask you a question? How'd you get here? I'm going to tell you exactly how you got here. One day at 3 p.m, someone who had been praying regularly and giving generously gets a vision from God and takes a step of faith in someone else who's been praying. And a divine appointment happens. And those two people praying, it's not just answered one time in one divine appointment with Cornelius and his family getting saved. It's been answered billions of times, and it was answered one more time when you put your faith in Jesus Christ. Those who raised their hand last week or came forward and received Christ last week, their spiritual genealogy traces back to 3 p.m. one day. In Acts chapter 10, verse 4. Now let's reverse engineer this thing. You already know where I'm going. He prayed regularly, gave generously. Let's talk about these two things for a few minutes. Now I could preach on prayer 6 days a week and twice on Sunday. I believe in the power of prayer. I believe prayer is the difference between the best you can do and the best God can do. I want the best God can do. I believe that prayer can change anything. Prayer can change everything. And you'll never break the sin habit if you don't establish a prayer habit. I could go on and on and on. Prayer is the game changer. And I love that it says he prayed regularly to God. Now, what's interesting, it doesn't tell us when, where, how. I don't know if he prayed in the morning or the evening or both. I don't know if he was a kneeler or a pacer. I don't know if he was a hand folder, this style, this style, this style. No clue. I don't know if he was eyes closed, eyes open. King James prayer, perhaps. NIV prayer. Don't know. I don't know how and when and where he prayed, but this gives me everything I need to know. He prayed regularly. He had a prayer habit. I want to tell you something. When you pray to God regularly, irregular things will happen on a regular basis. Your life takes on a dimension of spiritual adventure. Why? Because God goes before you. He's setting you up. He's preparing good works in advance. It's prayer that not only helps set up some of those appointments, it just helps us recognize them when they come our way. And so it says he prayed to God regularly. Doesn't tell us how long, but day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. He prayed to God regularly. One of my prayer heroes is George Mueller, along with pastoring one church for 66 years. How awesome is that? He established the Ashley Down Orphanage Mueller cared for 10,024 orphans while establishing 117 schools for their education throughout England. In today's dollars, George Mueller raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million for these kingdom causes that he was a part of. Now, that's an amazing feat. What makes it even more amazing is that he never asked anybody for a penny. The Lord gave him a conviction that he wasn't to ask anybody for money, but was to just pray when he had a need. Now I'm going to share something with you, and this is like the sermon within the sermon, because I quote this all the time. Oswald Chambers said, "Let God be as original with others as he was with you." And so I'm not saying that this is a precedent you have to follow. I mean, but it was personally for Mueller. He just felt like he should never ask for money. And he didn't. What's awesome is that he journaled. And so when there was a need, when there was a prayer, he would write it down in his journal. And the reason why that's so cool is that we know, based on that there were more than 30,000 specific prayers answered. You know what? When they needed a pipe fixed, he prayed for a plumber. When they needed food, he prayed that someone would just give them leftovers. And unbelievable, 30,000 answers to prayer. When you pray to God regularly, game on. Some miracles are going to happen. God's going to do something. One other little footnote, and I think this is why his faith was so strong, okay? Mueller read the Bible cover to cover more than 200 times. You get that much of the word in you. And guess what? Jeremiah says that God is watching over his word to perform it. And that's exactly what he did in the life of George Mueller. Now, one little thing. Mueller once said, this is one of the great secrets in connection with successful service for the Lord. To work as if everything depended upon our diligence, and yet not to rest in the least upon our exertions, but upon the blessing of the Lord. In other words, the key to kingdom productivity is working like depends on you. You got to work really hard at what God has called you to do, but then you can't trust in your work. You got to keep trusting in the Lord. Now, there's a little nuance here. This is tough I don't even know if I can accurately, but I was speaking at a university not too long ago, and it's a university that the Lord has blessed. It was awesome. Speaking to 10,000 college students just going after God. Awesome. Afterwards, someone shared with me the fact that God has blessed that university so much that I think they have $1.5 billion in the bank. And so they're building and they're expanding, but they shared it in the spirit of, it's hard to feel a sense of desperation when you have $1.5 billion in the bank. In fact, let me push a little bit further. Would you not agree? The more money you have, it might be a little bit tougher to trust the Lord and not at some point begin to trust the gifts that God has given you. Some of you so talented. Some of you experienced so much success. Listen, I'm preaching at you right now that you cannot allow yourself to get to the place where you trust in that gift more than you trust in God. Where you trust in the job that God's given you, in the influence that God's given you, in the wealth that God's given. We don't trust in horses and chariots. We trust in the Lord our God. And so we got to make sure that we're in this place of just raw dependence upon Him. Well, let me tell you about one of our one days as a church, August 12, 2001. Our first 5 years as a church, we're not glamorous. First year, 20, 25 people, and there wasn't a whole lot happening around NCC. Like, we have 146 small groups now, free market system. Like, you had two choices back in the day, and really neither one was probably very good. Like there wasn't a whole lot happening. I'll be honest. I hope my preaching has matured a little bit over the last 15 years. But I don't know I don't have a lot of people coming up to me and saying, "Remember that sermon you preached the first 5 years?" Not a lot of that going on. So, we were barely making it. Not a lot of people, not a lot of money, and just kind of hanging in there. But we were doing the right things. We were loving people. We were serving the city. But really, no one knew we existed until one day a reporter gave me a call and said, "Hey, it's really intriguing to me that you meet in the movie theaters at Union Station. That's kind of an interesting place to meet. And then I heard that you're a lot of single 20-somethings." And she said, "Could I interview you?" And inside, I was trying not to act overly excited, overly desperate. But it was oh my, someone knows we exist. And I was so excited to do the interview. And so, I kind of unleashed on her, and she said, "Well, now this weekend, you take a look at the newspaper. My editor said it should make it in this weekend. Check out the religion section." And so I'll never forget August 12, 2001, walking into Union Station, and I'm pretty excited that morning because we're going to be in the paper. And so I went to the newsstand and I picked up the paper and, kind of went through it and found the religion section, very, very small section. Took a while to find it, and found it and opened it up, and we weren't in there. And just the disappointment. And so I folded back up and put it on the newsstand because if we weren't in there, I wasn't going to buy it. $1.25, that's not in the budget. I fold it up and I put it on the newsstand, and we're on the front page. We're on the front page of the Washington Post, Sunday edition. What? And here's what I love. Here's what I've always loved about this. The favor of God is what God can do for you that you cannot do for yourself. You know what? We couldn't have put ourselves on the front page of the paper. And I love it because one day, August 12, 2001, one day God said, "You know what? I'm going to put you on the map. I think it's time." And man, crazy. That was a catalyst for some of our early growth as a church. And man, as they say, I guess the rest is history. By the way, I used to say that it was a slow news day. Then the Lord convicted me. Wasn't a slow news day. It was God's time. One day, you keep doing the right thing day in, day out, week in and week out. God's going to show up. He might just show off. All right. So Cornelius prayed to God regularly. Now, it's this second statement that I really never talked much about, but it says he gave generously to those in need. Oh, my goodness. You want to set yourself up? Do you want to set yourself up? You want to position yourself to see God move in some remarkable ways? You give beyond your ability and watch God do something beyond your ability. It says he gave generously to those in need. This week, Laura and I flew down to Nashville, spent a couple of days with Dave Ramsey. Dave is a financial guru, and a guy named Ron Blue, kind of the grandfather of some of the stewardship and financial, just someone that taught a lot of biblical principles on that subject matter. And then a pastor that I really love and admire, Bill Hybels from Willow Creek. And they invited about 24 pastors to come down and just spend a day and a half with them. It was awesome. First of all, Nashville has some good barbecue, and so that's good right there. Already a win. And then they rented out the Country Music Hall of Fame, and we had this private concert with 3 songwriters of the year. It was just surreal. It was really incredible. And so we're there and we're talking stewardship, and the Lord begins to convict me. And I want to apologize because I've preached sermons, but I don't know that we've done everything we can as a church to help you, to help us. Really live a life that of biblical principle. And I'm not just talking about giving the tithe. Listen, here's what I'm getting at. It is really hard to give generously if you're in debt, if you have credit cards that are eating you alive, if you're in a place where financially, if you don't budget, it's hard to give generously. I'll tell you why, because a lot of money, there's just no margin left over. And listen, I want to make sure that we as a church are helping us live out biblical financial principles. And so at one point, Bill Hybels is sharing, and I love what he shared. I'm going to share it with you because I believe that generous giving does begin with the tithe. Now, I think we've got to talk more about budgeting, more about how to get out of debt and those kinds of things. But you know what? God can't give back what you don't give away. And you know what? I really do believe if you give beyond your ability, God then will bless beyond your ability. And so Bill Hybels said that there are two different kinds of people, and I liked his description. He said, those who live off 100% of their income and trust that 100% of their income is going to get them from point A to point B financially. And then he said there are those people who give God the tithe, or 10% of their income, and they believe that 90% of their income will not just get them from point A to point B financially, but to point C, a whole different place financially. And Bill Hybels said that both kinds of people think the other people are crazy. And so he said, well, which crazy are you? I want to tell you what I am. I'm the crazy person that believes that God can do more with 90% than I can do with 100%. I'm the crazy person that believes that really joy is found on the giving side of life. I'm the crazy person that believes the more that you give away, that the more you enjoy what you keep, and then God does some miracles in between. I'm the crazy person that believes you can't outgive God. I'm the crazy person that believes when you give generously, that God then is about to do something that can be pretty incredible. Now, I want to be real careful right here. You know, last year, I was speaking at an event back to back with David Green, the founder of Hobby Lobby. They've made billions of dollars, and they've given away hundreds of millions of dollars. And he said something that really struck me. He said that a material reward is the least return on a material gift. In other words, I think some of us, like we approach this giving thing like it's some kind of game that we can outsmart God and that we give to get back. And I'm just going to tell you, God's not going to honor that. That's not how you play the game. Blackmail and bribery don't work. And no, it's just about giving because you see the eternal value of investing something that will outlast your life. And then you discover the joy on the giving side of life. And so let's be very careful. We're not just setting giving goals, that we're getting goals, that we're setting giving goals, that we're living generously. Because if we are, these two things will set us up. Now, I've noticed in my own life that nearly every financial breakthrough is the result of some kind of step of faith in my life. And again, it's not about giving to get, but you can't outgive God either. And so I remember many years ago, and I could tell you a dozen different stories, the Lord impressed on us to give a gift to another ministry in the city. And that's when, we could barely rub two nickels together. And I don't remember how we arrived at the number, but $350. And this would have been way back in like 96. And this was just out of our personal giving. And we felt like the Lord would honor it. It was the right thing to do. And so I remember writing this check and putting it in an envelope and walking over to the post office at 45 L Street Southwest and dropped it into the mailbox outside. And I went in because we had a post office box inside and opened up an envelope, and inside the trifold leather was a $10,000 check. Like not 60 seconds. That's a 2,757.1% return in 60 seconds flat. Now, I want to tell you something. I believe God had to make it a very short gap in between those two things because I wouldn't have connected the dots. But I want to tell you something. When after an experience, a miracle like that, it's hard not to give with a measure of holy anticipation. How is God going to show up? How is God going to show off? Now, generosity is one of our 4 family values. Gratitude, humility, and courage are the others. We love to give, and what we've learned is that there is just pure joy when you give generously, and then it positions you to be a part of miracles in other people's lives. He prayed regularly, gave generously. Let me jump to a close. One day in 1961, an MIT meteorologist by the name of Edward Lorenz was working with a prototype computer program designed to simulate and forecast weather systems. On the day of his accidental discovery, Lorenz lost track of time, had to hurry out of his office for a meeting, and instead of entering 0.506127, the number he had used in an earlier algorithm, he rounded to the nearest thousandth, 0.506, thought it wouldn't make much of a difference. 1/1000th of 1%, thought it would be inconsequential. Lorenz figured wrong. When he returned to the lab later that day, found a radical difference in the simulated weather conditions. And according to Lorenz, the numerical difference between the original number and the rounded number was the equivalent, are you ready, of a puff of wind created by a butterfly's wing. His conclusion was simple yet profound. A minor event like the flapping of a butterfly's wing in Brazil could conceivably alter wind currents sufficiently to cause a tornado in Texas. Now, you know it as the butterfly effect, and it's become popularized, general butterfly effect. Simply stated, minuscule changes in input can make macroscopic differences in output. What if we just quit worrying about the output? Why don't we leave that to God? He's the one who'll set up the divine appointments. He's the one who'll make the miracles happen. What if we just pray regularly and give generously? What if we just did that? Because if we did that, I think we'd experience more of the one days. I think one choice, one change, one risk, one idea, one day can change everything. And so I have one exhortation at the end of the day. Give generously, pray regularly, keep giving, keep praying. Keep praying, keep giving, keep doing the right things, keep humbling yourself, keep reading through Scripture, keep loving people, long obedience in the same direction. Keep on keeping on. And then when you feel like you're about to give up, then sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is hang in there, and then hang in there a little longer. Keep on keeping on. Keep giving generously. Keep praying regularly. And one day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, God's going to show up, and He's going to show off. I can't tell you how or when or where, but He's a God who loves to do it. Let's pray. Father, help us. Help us draw faith from your word. God, help us not just be hearers of the word, but doers of it. Lord, I pray that we would be a people that stand on your promises, that stand on your word, that put our confidence not in our own ability, not in our own resources, but in the promises of God, that we would anchor ourselves to those promises. Lord, thank you for that divine appointment that happened a long, long time ago, Cornelius and Peter, and the difference it's made in our lives. God, I pray that you would help us follow a wonderful example. Lord, to those who are discouraged, I pray right now that you would breathe new resolve, a new inspiration in their hearts. Lord, for those who feel like, man, I've been doing this forever and are ready to give up, God, I pray that they would keep on keeping on. To those who are discouraged, to those who are living in fear, maybe those who are anxious about the future, God, I pray that we would anchor ourselves to the promises of God, that we would stand on your promises and believe that you are the God who delivers. Lord, we put our full faith in you, not just a little bit of it, all of it. Lord, like Jonathan Edwards, like Stanley Tam, like Thomas McClellan, God, this is our one day. We put our faith in you. Lord, I pray for those who today just need to make a simple decision to begin praying or keep praying, to begin giving or keep giving. Lord, I pray that this one day would be the first day of the rest of our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.